So I welcome Stéphan Schaub, that has been work at Nix for almost 4 years. It's great to have you here for many times, many years. And
I'm, I, is this working? Yes,
yeah,
it is. No, I'm enjoying it tremendously
yeah,
well.
okay.
So
It's good. So Stéphan, he works basically among other things, but I think there are two composers that Stéphan works in his PhD. One is Jan Schenax, the other one is Milton Babbitt. So actually, he is comparing in his works the way Babbitt and Schenax, the way they conceive composing music. Somehow, these two composers, they work with formalization, music formalization, but they have a different musical thinking, different way of conceived composition. Today, Stéphan is going to presenting for us an analysis of a Xenakis piece that's called Herma. It's correct, Herma? And this is a piece for piano solo. This is a very interesting structure that he's going to present to us. And I hope you enjoyed it. Welcome.
Thank you. So, just to sort of maybe as an introduction, I will talk a bit more than just about Herma, and say also that since my PhD that was on Milton Babbitt and Xenakis' compositional processes, I have worked more towards computer-assisted music analysis, and also being drawn towards interactive systems because I see a clear link between the two. And these are the topics that I will sort of develop today in my presentation. So basically, my talk will be in three parts. I will start with sort of a general outline of the current state of music analysis and of its relation to new technology. This will be my vision. I will propose you a sort of general outline that you might agree with or not, but that's why we will have a roundtable afterwards. And only then, after having sort of situated the general problematic, I will discuss a concrete example, Yannis Xenakis' Herma for piano. It's a composition from 1961. There are several reasons why I chose this piece, some of which I will detail later on. One important reason is that's the first piece I sort of studied arriving at IRCAM in 98. And so there's a historical link with our guests today who also studied. There's a publication we had on this composition, and it also fits pretty well in what I want to show you today. And from this analysis I will present will arise some sort of wishes for the future. I will look at some perspective new technology may offer in a maybe not so distant future, with sort of what we hope to achieve or what we're working towards here at Nix. And this also, any comment will be welcome. This last part will be sort of dreaming, sort of going a bit in a perspective or perspectives for the future. So if you have questions, you can always sort of interrupt me and ask questions. They're always welcome. So let me start. I will actually go through my first part, outlining my title. Actually. So the first part, I will look at music analysis and try to define a little bit what do we put under this title, this name. So I personally put three elements in music analysis that I give you here. One is a set of concepts and methods that are usually used to sort of define music analysis as a discipline when there is sort of a discipline. The process by which work is scrutinized so that these concepts and theories are applied in a concrete work, and the result of that process. So there are three elements that are interlinked in music analysis. So it's not a definition, sort of one phrase that tells you music analysis is this. I sort of give you broad image of what I think music analysis involves. In this last part, what's sort of the result of it, I will put a variety of examples, a variety of types of analysis into sort of this continuum that goes from a very private sort of attentive listening that I think is also analysis, or that we'll consider also as being analysis, to the most verbal interpersonal communication, the type of analysis you would have in an academic setting, where you have to sort of put your ideas on paper, illustrate it, put musical examples, etc. So this is my little continuum, and I will fill out this little line here. So the first would be sort of this: you listen to a piece of music, you sort of situate, you have an attentive listening, you situate it in a particular current or style, and you sort of stay at the surface. You might also want to extract characteristics of an improvised performer. If you're an improviser, you will be very attentive at various choruses by various improvising masters to sort of learn and assimilate and imitate maybe what they are doing. In the course of an improvisation, you will also sort of evaluate the past and the present of the improvisation to sort of guide what you will be doing or what your future production will be. So I will also include this as a type of music analysis. Then study performances. If you're a performer, you will also, this is similar to the improvised version, but this is more with a score. Study performances of a given composition to prepare for a performance of a written composition. You might also want to extract features of a composition or a style to rework them, if you're a composer, to rework them creatively in another composition. Another form of analysis that actually sort of ties in the topic of the day. I don't know if this was very clearly communicated. Sort of today's topic in general is, I can't remember how it was formulated, but I can read it. I have it in my pocket. It was tools for analysis and creation, musical analysis and creation. So this is clearly one of the important links between analysis and creation, composition. Then I will put the study of a score, looking at how it was crafted, how it was put together, to try to reconstruct the creative path. This is very much linked to this part here, to the features, to sort of imitate, to see how you can extrapolate on a given composition. Then I would produce images of a composition, how a composition could be heard. So you will give us sort of a scenario. You could go, well, this is important, this is less important, this is more important, this is, and sort of give us a scenario of the unfolding of the music. You could also be more strict and produce an image of how it should sound. So if you're, for example, a conductor, there you will analyze the piece to say, this should sound this way, and the strings you should play a bit louder here, and the woodwinds a bit softer here. So another form of analysis. And then you can also, sort of in a musicological setting, look at how it fits into more general currents. What style, where does it come from, where does it go? This is probably yet another type of analysis. And last but not least, Moreno knows quite well to consolidate a theoretical construct. So this is then will, if you're successful, enter in the first component that I showed earlier, where you have the concepts that are in play in music analysis. So we sort of have a continuum, but of course things sort of switch back and forth. They're not necessarily in order here. I don't mean this as hierarchical, but there is sort of a transition. This is more sort of private. You don't need to have it communicated, to have it put on paper. Whereas here, if you're constructing a theory to be published, then you will have to put it on paper. And also what happens, the more you get to the interpersonal part, the more you depend on a very old technology, which I call the score, a musical score. It's something that is not very, sorry. Something that has been around for quite a while, that has developed over the centuries. And I will actually underline three functions of the musical score. The first is a set of performance instructions. So you basically have a code that tells you, or that tells the performer, put your finger here and produce this sound for this duration, this intensity. Nothing more. Then it also gives an access to the work as it sounds. So that is what's called reading a score. And so when you perform an analysis, you open the score and you have an image of how the music would sound. And it gives you an access also to the work as craft, to the way the work was conceived. So generally in music analysis, you have a sort of a nice circulation between how it sounds and how, when you study the score, and how it's crafted. You sort of imagine, this was a good idea. You sort of have a look that mixes these two things. But this image I give you here, is a rather old one. And this is what brings me to my next topic, if everything works well. Back to my title, and actually to the music analysis today part. And in my view, music analysis today has the score, or its absence, has sort of broken down this access to the work as it sounds from the score. It has also broken the access to the work as craft most of the time. Look at the score, you have no idea how it was put together at first, without any further information. And for sure, the whole circulation between the two is messed up. So you have an entirely new and complex situation. So as a way to, I will spend some time illustrating that quickly with examples from the repertoire before going on to the technology part. So one style or one current that has completely done with the score, has completely gotten rid of the score is free improvisation. There you have no real rule that applies. People improvise or come together, and there's no score, there's nothing to rely on. Just one example, extreme example. Then my second example, if it wants to show up, electroacoustic music. So there you have lots of technologies to produce sounds, to transform sounds, but it does usually stay in sketches. There is no score to be performed usually, and so this is another example where the score is sort of absent. To be completely fair, there have been scores. This is Stockhausen's score for his study 1, I think. This is a rare document of Xenakis' Analogique B, where he really had a score it's dedicated to Mission. But these are scores that are much closer to the sketches. They are basically sketches that have been worked out nicely. So it gives you here access to the work as craft, but how it will sound, I mean, how this will sound is totally mysterious. I mean, you really have to listen to the piece to actually get access to that. Another example is improvisation with sets of verbal rhythmic instructions. So there's the famous, it's an excerpt from Stockhausen's Aus den 7 Tagen, several movements or parts that are all kind of like this. So there as well, you have no real score. Now getting closer to where the score actually is present, you have fuzzy notation, what I call fuzzy notation, things that are not in the traditional precise notation. They might be graphical notation, or here we have Christian Wolff's Music for 1, 2, or 3 people in honor of Jonatas, with whom I have discussed this piece. And you have all sorts of types of score that have this fuzziness, that are open scores. But open in the sense, because there's also open score where the notation is very precise. This is Pierre Boulez's Third Sonata, traditional notation, but the order is sort of open. But here we are getting closer to the score in the old traditional sort of, there is a score at least. And then we have the case that will interest us, or at least interests me a lot, is the case of the very complex score. Here we have, it's always the example you take, it's always Brian Ferner when you want to show complex music. But basically, there's so much information, it's all very precise, it's all following the traditional score, but there's so much going on that you have no way of looking at the score and say, this is how it sounds, and this is probably how it was crafted. This is totally, or at least partially gone. And then we have the mixed compositions. So here again, I will have a very simple example. This is Analogique A and B by Xenakis. And so you have the traditional score here, which is quite simple, which is quite good. But here you can see, from here starts the tape. And so you're looking at the score and you have no idea what the tape sounds like. And so you lose the access to the work as it sounds in general. So this is sort of what I see as the state today, sort of music analysis. It's a complicated one. And going back to my title, it brings along new issues and a link with new technologies. So I will go through a list of non-exhaustive issues that we have in music analysis of this type of 20th century, where the score has sort of lost its old function. If it will come. Yes. One of the issues is music analysis still a meaningful enterprise? It's a bit of a provocative question, but musicologists that study 20th century music sometimes totally do without scores. They will listen, they will look at the intellectual currents, they will look at all sorts of things. And we have to admit there are lots of music around where the score isn't even there. So there have to be some strategies to go around the score at some point. So this is a bit of a provocative question. We may discuss it later on today. Then how can we handle the complexity? And so now I'm concentrating more on the complex score. How can we handle this complexity that is present in a significant portion of the contemporary repertoire? Can we circumvent the traditional score and work directly with representations of the overall results, so with the audio? This is now I'm sort of sliding towards technology, as you can see. Though this can also be done with paper and listening, of course. And then finally, what should we look for and how can we represent the results of an analysis? So when we have a Brian Ferner score, where do we start? How do we enter in this I wanted to say in this mess. It's not a mess, but it's a jungle. Jungle is the right word, particularly in Brazil. So now the link to technology. Technology has, in a way, been partly responsible for the situation today. So first we had the recording technologies. We could record, reproduce, replay. We could manipulate tapes. It's a long time ago. And then came our main protagonist, digital technology. In the 1950s, first manipulating symbolic data. So the first computer-generated compositions were basically scores that were generated, notes that were manipulated and generated. And then later on, sound synthesis and signal processing, which first all this was offline, and increasingly became real time, so that today the scope of what a composer actually can manipulate and control is much bigger than what it used to be. And this whole thing has created a whole repertoire of mixed music, of sort of open possibilities. So in a way, technology has complicated things for us who want to do analysis, as I do. But at the same time, it has also provided very powerful tools. So we have here a page from the Hamdrum music analysis tool. Works on symbolic. here I have two little images from, another one from, this is Pierre Coupri's E analysis, where you can sort of annotate scores and have all sorts of manipulations to this more traditional. This is to analyze, this is the E analysis, the same guy that developed, where you can annotate spectrograms. So here you're working directly on the audio. And here I have a frame from Sonic Visualizer. I'm sort of giving you sort of four important ones. Sonic Visualizer works directly on audio. It was developed for performance, study of performance. So it gives very precise information about audio streams. You can align performances so that two different performances are sort of on top of each other. It's sort of a time stretch, so you can compare one performance with another. So it's a very powerful tool in which you have all sorts of audio descriptors, which play an important role. We have the whole mirror technology that is helping us. So we have also gained from technology, and this is sort of what I want to discuss with a concrete example, the example of HERMA. So basically what I will now do is, in the last part, with HERMA, is illustrate a case where I think technology can be very useful, is very useful, but there's still a lot to do to really make it practical. And I hope through this example to sort of touch on a more general context. So I hope to be able to generalize that. But for now, let's talk about Yanis Xenakis' HERMA. So why this example? I already stated a couple of examples, a couple of reasons for picking this example. But now I can state two more. We'll state two more. First, it is quite clearly in this category of complex scores to analyze, where you have no direct access looking at this, oh, this is how it sounds, this is how it was put together, it's all clear, it's all very brilliant. You have lots of notes. The tempo is quite fast. You will see, we'll listen to it. For those who don't know the piece. And so how do you start? That's sort of the question. And then we have, there's a peculiarity about this piece, is that the composer, Yanis Xenakis, has actually, in 1963, published a text in the Revue Musicale, that was a collection of his older text, which he titled Musique Formelle, which was later translated in Formalized Music. Lots of people know about this book, for sure. Jonathan knows. And in this very important text by Xenakis, he sort of presents the reason, he sort of presents a big reasoning. He starts with a big tabula rasa, talks about science, cognitive science, all sorts of things. And towards the end of his chapter, he really provides a model of sort of almost a sketch of how he conceived of HERMA, of this piano piece. So this will be very interesting for us because this gives us access to sort of the work as craft as well. So before listening to the piece, I will very quickly outline the model that he presents, that Xenakis presents in his text. So his idea is quite radical. He starts with all the notes on a piano keyboard, 86 notes on a piano keyboard. And he says this is his universe, his abstract universe. And from these 86 notes, he selects 3 sets called A, B, and C. They are sets of notes. You can look at them, they are not diatonic, they make no sense in themselves. He doesn't actually, as a parenthesis, he doesn't provide the sets in his text. It's sort of something that has been discussed and complex issue because you have to actually extract them from the score. It doesn't always work completely nicely. But anyway, these are the 3 sets, A, B, and C. And since he is talking in the abstract, he actually represents them in a Venn diagram. So this is the universe, this is the 86 notes. And here you have represented by this little circle the nodes that are in C. So this is what he starts with, completely outside of time. It's an important concept he develops in this text. And he decides that he wants to have his composition progress from this A, B, and C, these three sets, to a set he will call F final, which is a sort of a set theoretic combination of A, B, and C. So he takes the three sets A, B, and C, keeps all the nodes that are common to A, B, and C, and takes out all the ones that are common only to two of the sets. This is where he wants to get at. This is his goal. And so the whole piece, he says, should progress towards F like fin in French, finale, I don't know. So how does he do that? Because he's still sort of outside time. There's no temporality involved. And so he will actually notice that, or he notices, that this set F can be written in two different ways using set theoretic operations. So the little dot here is the intersection, the nodes that are in common between two sets. This bar is the complement, so all the nodes that are not in the set A, the A bar. This plus is the union between two sets, etc. So there are two different ways, and each complement of this equation here corresponds to a particular set each time, so a set of nodes. And further, he notices, or he invents, Xenakis was an extremely creative guy. He invents this diagram that goes basically, it tells you, you go from A, B, and C, and he recreates these equations as a succession of operations. So you start from 2, and then here you do the intersection operation. You have A intersect B. Here you do the union with another set that comes from another place. So he basically translates this equation into a succession of operations that start from A, B, and C and get to F. Then he decides, this is entirely his decision, to actually use this as a logic of succession between sets. So he starts with A, B, and C, and he defines two planes using the dynamics, where one of the equation is progressing towards F, and another plane where the other equation is progressing towards F. So it's sort of two parallel processes. Does that make sense? Okay. And finally, he gives also in his text what he calls the in-time diagram, l'organigramme en temps. So I mentioned quickly that the whole idea of in-time, outside time was the central issue in the text, in the musique symbolique text. And so here he gets to the last in-time stage. Well, you can read, this is read like this. Start over here on the top. And it is basically a temporal flow each time you go down the line. At the very top, you start with the reference set, so all the sets of the piano. Then he presents A here, and then he presents A complement, B complement, C complement, and then he starts with the process, two parallel process, to get at the end to F. Does that make sense? So he adds some information here that is not in the theory he presented before. So he talks about linear presentation and clouds, and he also gives densities. He talks about densities. So how many notes should be played per second or per unit of time? So this is basically the abstract model that Xenakis provides in his text that he published in 1963. And so now let's try to analyze this. But before that, let's listen to the piece. Question until now. So. So, so this was Herma. Does it work now? Right? It's funny. So this was Herma by Xenakis. So let us look now at the score. And I've used before I start, several computer-aided techniques. There will be piano rolls, there will be sort of representation, graphic representation. I'm indebted to Michael Mal for helping me out with some of the graphs that I will show. Colleague at IACAM as well. And I am indebted to a person whose name I forgot, who provided us with the MIDI file. So we actually could work with the data already available to actually work with computer. And so this being said, let me start with the introduction. And the introduction is actually quite telling. You can see readily that the two, I don't know whether you can see it very well, but it's sort of coded the darker, the louder, and the lighter, the softer in volume, in intensity. And you can see in this piano roll of the first part, there's a bit of a play on register. He sort of moves up before he opens up and sort of towards the end. And there is a very clear crescendo and a very clear accelerando, in the sense that you have densities that are increasing rapidly, very rapidly, exponentially actually. And then he ends here with a little transition where you have held notes, and it becomes very slow, very contrasting. And in this little introduction, he has already given us a lot of what will happen further down the piece. Did you want to hear it again? Because I have the... Yes? Okay. So there is a sort of another section in this composition in Herma that also has quite striking characteristics when you look at them in the form of a piano roll. This is sort of in the middle. It separates, really a clear articulation point. It separates the whole presentation of the sets A, B, and C and the complement with the sort of developments afterwards. And here we can really see that register is crucial. I mean, he sort of shapes it into this sort of descending form that goes back up and then opens up again. Here the intensity is constant, and just like in the introduction, he ends with a big contrast here with soft notes and held, sort of something much more, much calmer in a way. Let's listen to it also to sort of. So from these two sort of articulation points, we can sort of now look sort of more on the overall piece. Here, what I have represented is the loudness that I have obtained from the recording through this sonic visualizer. And it basically, well, the higher the louder. Obviously, it's very easy to read. And you can see quite clearly that the crescendo of the introduction and the fact that our articulation point here is also one of the loudest moments of the piece, consistently loud, the other ones. There's also here a graph representation of the densities. Densities, so number of notes per unit of time and how this evolves. And you can see quite clearly that in the introduction it sort of shoots up and then it goes back down. So general evolution. And here, also the density is very, very high. Actually, the density here has been represented independently of the register occupied. There's another form of density. You can calculate it relative to the range that is occupied. So that if you do it that way, the point where the range sort of closes would be even higher in density because the overall range occupied is smaller. And then here, what does it appear? Here, an outline of the overall use of the range, the occupation of the range. So you can see sort of how it goes up here, goes down, and here, how it's sort of this shape, this form here. This is not all that expressive, but it's an important, a very important aspect. So here we have the overall view. Now, let's look more into the details. I wanted to actually give more graphical representation and sort of sketched it out first. Sketched it out. This is sort of to be continued after that. It becomes very small and difficult to read. But what I want to point out is the use, well, clearly the use of silence, very important. That sort of, you notice there are some long silences that sort of divide the piece very clearly. There are lot of contrasts that also create the segmentation. There are pedal that is sometimes used, sometimes not used. And so this sort of creates very clear episodes one after the next. And it is rather slow-paced at the beginning during the presentation, and then it accelerates. It becomes faster and faster, sort of. And the pace of change, the rate of change, increases rapidly. One thing I wanted at this stage to point out is the way actually Xenakis introduces the elements one after the other in a very sort of almost pedagogical way. In the introduction, he says, okay, actually in the introduction, I will make a little parenthesis. The first 12 notes you hear are all different pitch classes. So actually, he sort of can give you the impression that this is a 12-tone piece, and some people have sort of tried it. It doesn't work at all, clearly. And it might just be sort of I don't know how you call it, a clin d'oeil. Not a joke, but a sort of a reference, a side reference. I'm not even sure he made it on purpose. But so the very beginning is sort of, could be 12-tone, but rapidly it becomes extremely clear that it's not what is important. Important is density, intensity, this sort of elements. And then after the introduction, he will continue introducing elements gradually. So here you have one big section where he introduces something that is, so this shortly after the introduction, where he introduced something very, very important, very new. He has two densities, intensities running parallel. And what he is actually presenting here is that you have, if you had two layers superimposed with two different intensities, which is, if you remember a bit, his intention on the theoretical text. But it's very pedagogical. If you look here, he will superimpose, this graph here should explain. This graph here is a graph representing densities, just like the graph I presented earlier. It just differentiates between the four intensities. And so you have the fortissimo that is here on top, and the pianissimo here, and this is triple pianissimo, and here you have the triple forte in black. So this is densities, but discriminated according to densities. And so you can see that he presents both at the beginning. Then he drops one and leaves just one going. And then he puts the two back together. So that it makes a very clear signal that this superimposition is important. Let's listen to this part. So I know you know this quite well, how he sort of shuts one up. There's one line that continues with density fortissimo, and the other one that comes fades in, fades out. Then he presents a big, very dense, very loud set sometimes. And then he comes back to the same scheme as before, but he presents now a new element that he points out. And it's basically here, he will stop, and there will be a chord that will be played very loudly. And then this stop, pause, and he goes back. And this sort of simultaneous chord playing will come back at various points during the composition as sort of, sometimes sort of in the middle of things, but other times sort of a closing gesture, as a way of finishing a set. And actually, I don't know if you remember, but at the very end, they sort of, when he presents the F, there's sort of this huge activity, dance, very loud, and then he ends with two notes that he hits and the pedal that continues. So this is something that, this is an element that he signals right here. So let's listen to this part. So then he comes back to one set with high density, one intensity, and then comes a very short. You can see how these presentations, these sort of expositions, become each time a bit shorter. Here again, the two densities, two different intensities that superimpose, and here comes the big articulation. And actually, all that will happen in the second part is a recall in a certain way of what he has presented in the first part. Now, there is also, if you look at loudness, the loudness curve here, you can see that he has also, despite the fact that the second part is always changing, there's always contrasting elements, there's very short sort of episodes, he has sort of grouped them as well into wider intensity curves. So that elements that are separated, sometimes separated by silences, clearly distinguished, there is sort of a sense of progression. In the first part of the development, what I call the development, I have to put this, of course, in quotes. And it's only towards the end that he will sort of separate things and they're loud, and it's not, there's no continuity anymore of this type. I don't know if that was very clear. So now let me point out another process that is going on parallel to everything I have just said. And it's sort of, it's interesting, it comes out, it sort of sticks out quite well when you do a piano roll. If you look here, this is the beginning of the second part, right after the articulation. This is the notes from the articulation. You have sort of accumulations. If you look here, there are very small ranges, areas that are played. And then there's this, the whole range is taken up again. And then here, again, this short areas. And so he gets, in the second part, he puts in this process where he's not using, he's occupying the whole range, but he's more and more getting into something that is not a scale, but it's sort of clearly localized. Let's listen to the beginning really quickly, and you will see that it comes out quite clearly. Where should I turn? So you can hear that sort of coming more and more as sort of these strange sort of sets that are not, that are something in between an indifferentiated cloud and a scale, a clear scale. So this continues throughout the piece. This is here the end, the final set. And you can see here, for example, I'll give you an example from the score, a very clear statement of this sort of strange set. So there are some exceptions, but most are clearly in clear areas and very loud. So it's very clearly marked. Now, oops. Now, up to now, I haven't talked at all really about the pitches, per se, about the sets that Xenakis devised, actually, or presented. Actually, in a way to underline the fact that they're almost secondary. Up to now, at least, they were. And the pitches, the role of the pitches is sort of, what do we do with this? Not really. So here I have presented, there are some interesting things, actually. I have presented the beginning of the piece, where, I don't know if you remember the beginning, very beginning, he was presenting his referential set. So any pitch was okay, was allowed. And I have put in light gray the pitches that are not in his F, in his final, and in dark, the ones that are. And it's sort of interesting to see how, at the beginning, he sort of stresses a little bit the F set on longer notes, generally, and with a frequency that is sort of not way, but is above what it should be if it was sort of totally random. So there is sort of almost announcing his final set in his introduction. Not that clearly, it's quite hidden, but it is more present than it would be if he did it completely randomly, I think. I don't know why these disappear. So beyond this, so it would be lots of what I've presented up to now, all of the description part of my analysis, is we can quantify. We can really sort of show the densities, various elements that you can actually extract using computer. The whole thing with the F set as how it percolates or how it is present in the piece, throughout the piece, could be something that I haven't done yet, but could be something that would be studied more using more computer tools. And in the same spirit, I will now make a few remarks sort of going further than just the analysis of the piece and looking back now at the crafting of the composition. I will go quickly because time is running out, but we can look at the probable chronology now of the various steps he took during the composition. Probably, and actually, I'm cheating a little bit because I looked at the sketches, so I know that it's more than probably. The idea of combining sets of pitches came first. That the elements, the pitches he put in the sets came second, and then he sort of already knew a little bit how they would progress. And the in-time diagram was probably devised as he was composing the piece. He wasn't totally a priori. He was composing and writing his diagram. Maybe there was a rough outline, but there are lots of going back and forth. And clearly, if you look at the in-time diagram, if you look at the sets, you will see lots of the comments I made are present already at that stage. You can see them in the in-time diagram, the superposition of densities, all this is present. But there are lots of things that are not at all in his model, which I want to say. One of the conclusions is not automatically generated, but the model is very present. And there are some conjectures that I would like to scrutinize further, which is basically the distribution of intervals. Because I haven't talked at all about intervals, and it's very difficult. It's a huge amount of information. It's very difficult to sort of see if can come out with, well, what are the intervals present? So why am I curious about this? I will quickly comment on that. In the mid-1950s, Xenakis started with a landmark composition, Metastasis. Probably you all know this big glissandi opening. And in the middle section, there is a serial, almost serial dodecaphonic section, actually 4 small sections. And in these, there's a text that he hasn't published, but it exists, where he explains how he conceived of his 12-tone rows. And at the beginning, there are sort of permutations. And the more he progresses into piece, the more he looks into distributing intervals. So this determines his rows with the way he wants the intervals to be distributed. Very interesting fact, considering that his first stochastic music piece, where he really used stochastic probability distributions, pitopracta for orchestra, what he distributes are not the pitches, what he distributes are the intervals. So that the pitches are actually a result of the intervals. So Xenakis was someone who very much thought about intervals as a way to color textures, to color the music he was writing. So in Herma, my conjecture is that there's something maybe to be found looking at statistics of intervals, how often they, because in the end he had a lot of freedom of permutation. Within the sets he could use a lot of successions. And so maybe but to do this we would have to have more computer tools. And then in general, so to have a remark, HERMA is a quite significant piece when you now look at the whole issue and analyzing to sort of situate a composition within a larger trajectory. It's quite an important one in Xenakis' trajectory because it is the beginning of the whole concept of a sieve. This is sort of a little aside. So with this, I wrap my analysis, actually. Are there any questions for now? Adolf?
Do you have in your mind the distribution function of the pitches?
There's no information about this.
But with humidifier, you can find them.
You could try, yes, you could. But the thing is that you have to have computing. I mean, you have to develop the whole thing. But you could, yes, you could maybe. No, I haven't. No, you're right. I haven't looked at it.
Because my question is, if Xenax had a kind of scheme for distribution of intervals connected with rhythm.
Could be. The whole rhythm, the whole distribution of duration also is sort of, but this requires statistical operations on the whole score. So there's a whole battery of operations that you need to have the tools developed for, which is exactly pointing towards the kind of questions I'm heading at towards now in future, what I hope to see as future developments to sort of explore the score. But it's, going back to the distribution, I haven't verified, but it's normally, it's a sort of linear distribution, according to Xenakis' comments, but it needs to be verified. It needs to be really looked at. But it's a good question, actually. So some perspectives. So this sort of analysis I just showed you, with sort of bits and pieces of computing, of representation using computers, could be sort of suggests further development into sort of an integrated platform, sort of our big vision. Integrated platform where you could have audio and MIDI sort of coordinated, which for now are sort of separate. We would have standard operation of segmentation and labeling. HERMA would work pretty well, pretty easy to segment. You can have all sorts of labels, labeling densities in various ways, minimum, maximum. Some search procedures where you could sort of group what is similar according to some criteria. You can visualize it. Also, sort of all the things that I sort of did painstakingly with my hands. Could be done automatically and have a sort of a language that where you could extend the interrogation. You could sort of send queries to the piece. For example, what's the distribution between this and this segment? And these sort of could be then create customized operation where you sort of put together more and more instructions that could maybe in the end become standard operations. So we have sort of a first outline of this sort of platform that we are thinking about and working towards, open to discussion as well. And what we see as possible domains of application, so it's not just analyzing HERMA, it would go further into score and audio exploration in general. So basically have an environment where you can interrogate. That's the whole thing. You have one score and you can sort of send queries to try to. And you can represent your results visually or in text if you want. Another domain of application, I think, would be score simulation. So there's a whole topic. I have some specialists here. Score simulation and modeling. Actually, it's not simulation, it's called modeling as well. Where you basically, when you have a sort of a generative procedure by some composer, you can explore it by one of the way you can proceed is you can explore it by changing the settings slightly and explore sort of the space that is spanned by the piece. 2 minutes. In the case of Herma, for example, supposing we have some particular interval distribution, or even the whole thing with the sets that sort of become almost quasi-scales. Well, what if you change the initial A, B, and C? So you could sort of generate various versions of Herma. This has actually, various versions, the score of Herma has been simulated with Gerard and Moreno have worked with that. And then look at the result and explore each time the result. And last but not least, I think that you could apply in an even more distant future to machine listening in a sort of improvisation online real-time context by sort of selecting operations that you sort of accelerate. Accelerate is always easier said than done, but sort of the idea would be to push towards automatic listening for improvisation. So in this whole scheme, I have a little graph here where I have 3 domains: musical composition, musical understanding, under which I put musicology, music analysis, improvisation and interaction design, where my little tool, this platform, would sort of be here and have a circulation between music analysis tool, interactive improvisation system, and music information retrieval, because music information retrieval has a lot to do with all these issues I talked about. And so I guess that's sort of it for the perspective. Thank you very much for your attention.
Really sorry to interrupt you. It was
no problem, but I'm on time. It's 11:15.
Yes, we have our round table is going to start on 11:15, and still 3 minutes for questions from internet and so on. There's some questions for
that's
you.
True.
There's a question from André Luis Gonçalves Oliveira. Wants to ask you, if musical analysis try to explain something related to the musical experience, don't you think that this power given to graphical representation could restrict it or constrain the role and the results of the analysis in itself? In other words, wouldn't you consider that you gave greater attention to the role of graphical representations than it should have in order to explain musical experience?
Well, I do not have the pretension to explain musical experience. I consider this to be a bit outside of my realm. This, of course, is not a good answer, but I can talk about my experience. It's that this sort of the graphical representation doesn't have any meaning in itself. It is sort of something to be interpreted to gain insight into the piece. When you start to have insight, to know these things, no matter what the mean is, it enhances your musical experience. It sort of gives you a new perspective on the composition, and you see, oh wow, this is how you did it, and you listen to the piece differently, or you even listen to other pieces differently. So I don't see graphical representation as being sort of detrimental to the musical experience. I don't think at all. There are other means, of course, to enhance musical experience. This is not the only one, but this is certainly one. And to go back to my initial sort of statement, the problem is we have very complex scores. We have a lot of information to deal with. And so if you want to make sense of all this information, we have to sort of boil it down to certain aspects and look at each aspect separately and try to extract, and first separately, and then of course in conjunction how they actually interact or combine to create the overall meaning, in quotes, of the piece, or one way of listening to the piece. So I don't know, it's a shame the person is far away, but maybe let me know if I have answered the question. Basically, send an email. And I hope I understood the question well as well.
Mais alguma pergunta? Okay. Is anybody here wants to ask a question for Stéphan? Okay.